I stand amidst the glittering facade of wealth and sin, a mask hiding my face, though not my purpose. Around me, the powerful and the privileged lose themselves to desire, to decadence. And there she is, my wife, entwined with him, his hand on her waist, his lips grazing her ear. It's more than betrayal. It's humiliation, calculated and cruel. Why him? Of all people, why my rival? But tonight, the masks will fall. And when they do, I'll be the one pulling the strings. Let's start from the beginning. The first thing I noticed was the perfume. It wasn't one I'd bought for her, nor was it the kind she used to wear. It was bold and unfamiliar, like a stranger had walked into my house. And yet it clung to her, on her coat, her hair, even the space we shared in bed. Sophia and I had been married for 12 years. I wasn't naive. People change, and marriage isn't always a smooth ride. But this wasn't just change, it was something else. She had started pulling away little by little, and I wasn't the type to ignore it. It started with her wardrobe. Sophia had always been elegant but understated. She preferred timeless pieces, the kind that didn't demand attention. Now, she left the house in dresses that hugged her frame, heels I didn't even know she owned, and a confidence that didn't feel like it was meant for me. Then came the absences. Meetings, friends, work. There was always a reason. She had explanations ready, polished, and practiced. But I could tell they weren't for my benefit. They were to justify something to herself. She thought I didn't notice. She was wrong. I wasn't the kind of man who let things slide. I ran my own company, built it from the ground up, and I knew when something wasn't adding up. At first, I tried to address it head-on. One evening, as she came downstairs in a sleek black dress, I asked, "Where are you going tonight?" Her answer came too quickly, like she'd rehearsed it. "Just out with friends." "Friends," I repeated, leaning back in my chair. "The same ones you've been seeing so much lately?" She bristled but kept her composure. "Is that a problem?" I didn't push further, not then. I knew how to pick my battles. But I didn't let it go, either. That night, I stayed up and waited. When she came home past midnight, I was still sitting in the living room, a book in my hands. Her surprise at seeing me there was poorly masked. "Did you have fun?" I asked, my tone casual, but my eyes steady on hers. She hesitated for a moment, then gave me that same practiced smile. "Yes, it was nice to catch up." "With who?" I pressed. Her smile faltered. "Just old friends, Lucas. You wouldn't know them." I nodded, letting the conversation end. But in my gut, I knew something was wrong. The distance between us wasn't just emotional, it was physical. She moved through the house like a stranger, her phone always within reach, always turned away. She laughed less with me and more with someone else, though I didn't know who. Not yet. I wasn't the kind of man to sit back and let my life unravel. If something was happening, I would find out. If she thought I wasn't paying attention, she'd underestimated me. And that was her first mistake. The lies started small. A missed dinner here, a vague excuse there. At first, it was easy to let them slide. After all, I was a busy man. Sophia and I had our routines, and while her sudden book club meetings or late-night outings felt unusual, I told myself not to overreact. But habits leave traces, and hers were starting to pile up. One night, she came home hours later than she said she would. Her cheeks flushed and her hair just a little too perfect for someone returning from dinner with friends. I asked her casually, "Where'd you go this time?" Her answer came quickly, almost too quickly. "Out with the girls. You know how they get. One drink turns into 3. It was plausible enough, but her eyes didn't quite meet mine. "Which girls?" I pressed, not accusing, just curious. She hesitated for a beat too long, then laughed lightly. "You don't know them, Lucas. They're from yoga." Yoga. A convenient answer, since I'd never met her yoga friends. Still, I let it pass. For the moment. But the next day, I noticed the receipts. They were sitting on the counter, a careless oversight on her part. One was for a boutique I didn't recognize, expensive lingerie, the kind she hadn't worn for me in years. The other was for a trendy rooftop bar, nowhere near the casual restaurants she usually claimed to visit. I didn't confront her. Not yet. There was no point in asking questions when I already knew the answers wouldn't satisfy me. Instead, I started watching more closely. The biggest clue came late one night. I'd finished my work early and was heading to bed when I saw the faint glow of her phone screen from across the room. She was curled up on the couch, her face lit by the soft light, a sly, playful smile tugging at her lips. I hadn't seen that expression in years. "Who are you texting?" I asked, my voice calm but firm. Sophia jumped slightly, startled. She quickly tilted the screen away, but her fingers didn't stop moving. "No one," she said, too casually. "Just Karen from book club." Karen. A name she'd never mentioned before. I leaned against the doorway, folding my arms. "You're smiling like that for Karen?" She laughed nervously, standing and slipping the phone into her pocket. "Don't be ridiculous, Lucas. You're being paranoid." I didn't reply, but my silence spoke volumes. She brushed past me, heading upstairs, and for the first time, I felt the weight of something real. These weren't innocent changes. The playful smiles, the cryptic receipts, the late nights. All of it pointed to something she wasn't saying. And if Sophia thought calling me paranoid would make me back off, she didn't understand who she was dealing with. I wasn't going to jump to conclusions, but I wasn't going to ignore the signs either. Sophia was lying, and whatever she was hiding, I was going to uncover it. One way or another. The gilded envelope wasn't something I was meant to find. It was a Saturday afternoon, and Sophia had gone out for yoga, leaving her bag tossed on the armchair in the living room. Normally, I wouldn't have touched it, but I was looking for the remote, and as I shifted her bag aside, it tipped over, spilling its contents onto the floor. That's when I saw it. A sleek, black and gold envelope, its surface shimmering under the sunlight. The elegant embossing on the front read, "The Masquerade Society." Curiosity tugged at me as I picked it up. The envelope was heavy, expensive, the kind of detail you didn't overlook. I slid the card out carefully. Inside, there was no explanation, just a cryptic invitation. A date, a time, and a single instruction: dress formally. Masks required. I stared at it, trying to piece together what this could be. It didn't fit with anything I knew about Sophia. Charity events weren't her style, and even if they were, why hadn't she mentioned it? When Sophia returned, her energy was lighter than usual. She greeted me with a breezy smile and leaned over to kiss my cheek, but I didn't return it. Instead, I held up the envelope. "This was in your bag," I said, keeping my voice measured. Her smile faltered for a split second, but she recovered quickly. "Oh, it's just an invite to a charity gala." She waved her hand dismissively. "Some boring networking thing one of my friends dragged me into." "Networking?" I repeated, tilting the card toward her. "For what, exactly?" Her laugh sounded forced, like she was trying to make light of it. "For fun, I guess. You know how these things are: dinner, drinks, some small talk. Nothing you'd be interested in." She reached for the card, but I didn't let it go right away. "I don't recall you mentioning it." She looked me square in the eye, her expression carefully neutral. "I didn't think it was worth mentioning. It's just a gala, Lucas. Don't make a big deal out of it." I handed her the card, watching her closely as she slid it back into the envelope and tucked it into her bag. Her movements were calm, composed, but there was something in her eyes, a flicker of something guarded. "You're going alone?" I asked. "Yes," she replied without hesitation. "It's not really your scene." I nodded slowly, forcing myself to appear satisfied with her answer. "I suppose not." She smiled again, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Don't worry so much, Lucas. I'll just go, make an appearance, and come home." I didn't press further. Not yet. That evening, as she moved around the house with ease, I couldn't shake the feeling that this invitation was more than she let on. Sophia was good at playing cool, but I'd seen the flicker of unease when I'd first confronted her. She was hiding something, and now, for the first time, I had a tangible clue. The Masquerade Society. It was the kind of name that felt drenched in mystery, like something out of a story you didn't want to believe. I didn't know what it was yet, but I was going to find out. The night of the masquerade, I told Sophia I had a late meeting. She seemed relieved, though she tried to hide it. As she stepped into the bathroom to get ready, I waited for the telltale click of the door lock. Then I grabbed my keys, slipped outside, and parked my car half a block away, hidden from view but with a clear line of sight to our front door. It wasn't long before she emerged, dressed in a black evening gown that hugged her figure in a way I hadn't seen in years. Her hair was swept up, her makeup bold and flawless, and in her hand was a gilded mask. The sight of her sent a jolt through me, not of admiration, but of something darker. This wasn't the Sophia I knew. She got into her car, and I followed at a safe distance, my headlights off as we moved through the quieter parts of the city. Eventually, she turned onto a long, private road lined with trees so dense they swallowed the streetlights. My unease grew with every mile, but I stayed focused. The road ended at a grand estate, the kind that belonged in magazines or movies. Tall iron gates loomed ahead, guarded by two men in dark suits. Sophia handed them the invitation, and they waved her through without hesitation. I parked my car just out of sight and crept closer on foot, staying in the shadows. Beyond the gates, the estate was alive with light and music. I saw flashes of masked figures stepping out of sleek cars, their laughter and conversation carrying through the night. Each guest was dressed in opulence, their faces hidden behind intricate masks that ranged from delicate lace to gilded grotesques. My breath caught when I spotted her. Sophia stepped out of her car, graceful and confident, clutching her mask in one hand. She paused, her eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on him. A tall man in a black tuxedo and a silver mask approached her, his stride deliberate. Even from this distance, I could see the way her face softened. She smiled at him. Not the polite, distant smile I'd grown used to, but something warm, familiar, intimate. He leaned in, his hand brushing her lower back as he whispered something in her ear. She laughed softly, tilting her head in a way that exposed the curve of her neck. Then she slipped on her mask, took his arm, and the two of them walked through the grand doors of the mansion together, disappearing into the glow of chandeliers and shadows. I stayed rooted to the spot, my fists clenched at my sides. For a moment, I let myself hope that there was an explanation, some reason for what I'd just seen. But deep down, I already knew. She hadn't smiled at me like that in years. I didn't follow them inside. Not yet. This wasn't the time for confrontation. Whatever this masquerade society was, it wasn't just a gala. It was something else, something dark, something secret, and Sophia was part of it. As I walked back to my car, my resolve hardened. She thought her mask would protect her. She thought this world she'd entered was hidden from me. But she was wrong. If she had secrets, I was going to uncover every single one. The tailor's shop was tucked away in a forgotten corner of the city, its faded sign swinging on rusted hinges. It was the kind of place you'd miss if you weren't looking for it, but it came highly recommended, albeit by an anonymous whisper on a forum I'd stumbled upon while researching the Masquerade Society. The man behind the counter raised an eyebrow as I slid the folded bills across the counter. He didn't ask questions. Instead, he nodded once, silently guiding me to a back room where rich fabrics hung like specters. By the time I left, I had a bespoke mask and a tailored suit, dark and elegant, designed to let me blend in with the society's elite. 2 weeks later, on the night of the next event, I stood before the mirror, my reflection a stranger. The mask was intricate and haunting, a black and gold design that concealed my face but left just enough exposed to make me recognizable. If anyone knew where to look, the suit fit like armor. I wasn't Lucas, the husband, anymore. Tonight, I was an infiltrator, stepping into Sophia's hidden world. I arrived at the estate alone, my invitation forged by the same tailor. The guards barely glanced at it before waving me through, their faces impassive. Inside, The scene was like stepping into another universe. The candlelit halls flickered with opulence, the air thick with the heady mix of perfume, champagne, and something darker, something primal. Guests in elaborate masks and extravagant gowns floated through the rooms, their laughter a low hum beneath the music. Every interaction felt charged, every glance heavy with unspoken promises. I moved carefully, staying on the edges, watching. It didn't take long to find her. Sophia stood in the center of a grand ballroom, her mask an intricate silver creation that shimmered under the chandeliers. Her gown hugged her figure, and her movements were fluid, confident, utterly unlike the woman who moved through our home like a ghost. Then I saw him, Damien. Even with the mask obscuring his face, I knew it was him. His build, his posture, the unmistakable arrogance in the way he carried himself. It could only be Damien. He was a prominent name in our social circle, a man who had spent years competing with me in business and charm, though I'd never considered him a real threat. Until now. He stood close to Sophia, his hand on her waist as they laughed together, their bodies angled in a way that excluded everyone else in the room. It was more than familiarity, it was chemistry, raw and undeniable. My stomach twisted as I watched them, my chest tightening with every touch, every shared look. She leaned into him, her hand brushing his arm as she whispered something in his ear. He grinned, leaning closer, their masks almost touching. The air in the room seemed to grow heavier, suffocating. I couldn't look away, but I couldn't stay either. I turned and walked out, weaving through the crowd, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. In that moment, I realized this wasn't just infidelity. This wasn't just a betrayal of our marriage. Damien had always envied me, always sought to undermine me. And now he wasn't just taking my wife, he was making a mockery of everything I thought I'd built. By the time I reached the car, my resolve had hardened. The masquerade was just the beginning. I wasn't done with them. Not yet. Sophia and Damien thought they were untouchable, hidden behind their masks. They were wrong. The next event came sooner than I'd expected. After the last masquerade, I'd taken time to process what I'd seen. Sophia's betrayal, Damien's arrogance, and the lies that had unraveled our life together. Each passing day only strengthened my resolve. This wasn't going to end quietly. When the next invitation appeared in her bag, I knew it was my chance. The timing was perfect. Sophia thought she was untouchable, and Damien? He probably thought I'd do nothing, that I'd let them continue playing their little game in the shadows. They were wrong. On the night of the event, I put on the mask and suit I'd used to infiltrate the last party. But this time, the purpose was different. This wasn't reconnaissance. This was war. The estate was the same as before, but everything felt sharper, clearer. I wasn't just another masked guest blending into the crowd. I was a storm waiting to break. The guards waved me through without hesitation, and I entered the ballroom, my gaze scanning for Sophia and Damien. It didn't take long to find them. They arrived fashionably late, just as I'd anticipated. Sophia's gown was blood red, a striking contrast to the silver mask Damien wore. They moved as though the world revolved around them. Sophia with her confident stride, Damien with his arrogant smirk. Their laughter carried through the room, grating on my nerves like nails on glass. But tonight, their world was about to shatter. I waited for the perfect moment. When Damien led her to the center of the room, the crowd naturally gave them space, their attention drawn to the pair like moths to a flame. It was the stage they wanted, the spotlight they craved. I stepped forward, cutting through the crowd like a blade. "Damien," I called out, my voice slicing through the decadent music. His head turned sharply, and for a fleeting moment, I saw surprise flicker in his eyes. Sophia froze beside him, her body stiffening as she recognized my voice. "Having fun?" I asked, pulling off my mask with a deliberate, unhurried motion. Gasps rippled through the room as the other guests realized who I was. Sophia's voice was barely above a whisper. "Lucas, what are you doing here?" I didn't give her the chance to explain. "Oh, don't mind me," I said, my tone sharp. "I'm just here to see how far you're willing to go to humiliate yourself." Damien stepped forward, trying to regain control. "Lucas, this isn't the place." I silenced him with a cold laugh. "Oh, I think it's exactly the place. Isn't that the whole point of this little charade? Masks and lies, right? But not tonight. Tonight, we're unmasking everything." I turned to Sophia, who was visibly trembling now. "You didn't think I'd notice, did you?" My voice dropped, filled with venom. "All the late nights, the secrets, the excuses. You thought you could have it all, your husband at home and your lover here. How's that working out for you?" Her tears came fast, but they didn't move me. Damien tried again, his voice dripping with false calm. "You've made your point, Lucas. Let's not turn this into something ugly." "Ugly?" I repeated, turning to him. "Ugly is what you've been doing behind my back for months. Or was it years? You always wanted what I had, Damien, my success, my reputation. And now, my wife. Tell me, how does it feel to finally take second place in something you thought you'd won?" The crowd watched in stunned silence, the tension in the room thick enough to choke. I stepped closer to him, my voice lowering but still cutting. "You think you've won something here, but all you've done is prove what a parasite you are. And Sophia," I glanced at her, my eyes cold, "you're just as pathetic for letting him use you to stroke his ego." Sophia's sobs broke the silence, but I didn't linger. I turned toward the exit, my footsteps echoing against the marble floor. Before I left, I looked back at the crowd. "Enjoy your masks, your games. But remember, truth doesn't stay hidden forever." With that, I walked out into the cold night air, leaving Sophia's tears and Damien's anger behind me. I didn't know what my next move would be, but one thing was certain. This wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. Sophia showed up the next morning, looking disheveled and desperate. The confidence she wore so easily at the masquerade had been replaced with tear-streaked makeup and trembling hands. I watched her as she hovered by the doorway, as though unsure of how to approach. She tried to explain herself, her voice cracking under the weight of her excuses. She blamed the monotony of our life, the distance between us, the thrill of what Damien offered. Her words washed over me without impact. I'd heard enough. As she stood there, begging for another chance, all I could feel was the coldness that had settled into my chest. She talked about mistakes, about making things right, but the betrayal was too deep. This wasn't something that could be repaired. I left her standing in the living room, her sobs echoing faintly as I walked away. There was no anger in me anymore, only detachment. She wanted forgiveness, but I couldn't give it. Not to her. Not after what she'd done. That day, I made the decision. Whatever love or pity I'd once felt for her was gone. All that remained was the need to regain control. Not just of my life, but of everything they'd tried to take from me. The days after the confrontation were quiet, but my mind was anything but. Alone in the house, I began piecing together the events that had led to this. Damien had always been a nuisance, a man who thrived on undermining others. But this wasn't just competition. It was a calculated move to humiliate me, to take everything I held dear. I replayed the years of his subtle provocations, his manipulative charm, and the way he'd wormed his way into Sophia's life. He'd been watching, waiting, and when he saw a crack in our marriage, he'd struck. Sophia wasn't innocent either. Her choices, her lies, her disdain for the life we'd built together. All of it fueled my anger. But she was no longer the focus. Damien had orchestrated this, and he would pay for it. The plan came together slowly, methodically. I started by targeting Damien's business. His reputation was built on perception, on the illusion of success. It wouldn't take much to shake that foundation. I planted whispers in the right places. Subtle rumors about his recent investments, suggestions that his dealings weren't as clean as they appeared. The rumors spread, casting doubt among his partners. When one of his ventures faltered, it set off a chain reaction. Next, I turned my attention to Sophia. She wanted excitement. A new life with Damien? Let her have it, but not without consequence. Through carefully chosen words with mutual acquaintances, I let slip fragments of her betrayal. I didn't need to say much. People filled in the blanks on their own, isolating her from the circles she once thrived in. I worked tirelessly, each step calculated, each move deliberate. There was no room for error. Damien had underestimated me, and Sophia had underestimated the depth of what she'd destroyed. This wasn't about rage anymore. It was about dismantling them, piece by piece, until nothing remained. The Masquerade became my hunting ground. Its very nature, anonymity and indulgence, made it the perfect stage for unraveling secrets. With a new mask and a carefully adjusted disguise, I slipped back into their world. This time I wasn't an outsider. I was a predator. The halls of the grand estate felt different now. What once seemed like a surreal blend of elegance and hedonism now felt like a theater of weakness. Every laugh, every touch, every whispered conversation was a thread waiting to be pulled. And Damien was at the center of it all, strutting through the crowd like a king. I observed him carefully, watching the way he spoke to the other guests, the way he flattered and manipulated. He thought he was untouchable, that his charm could shield him from the consequences of his arrogance. He wasn't even paying attention to me, which made it all the easier to listen, to learn. Sophia was there, too, but her presence had shifted. She lingered on the edges now, her once confident smile forced and fragile. The whispers I'd planted in her social circle had done their work. The people she once relied on were keeping their distance, their glances filled with quiet judgment. I made sure to fan those flames subtly, ensuring her isolation grew. The opportunity I'd been waiting for came at the end of the night. Damien, emboldened by drink and his own ego, cornered a fellow guest in one of the estate's private rooms. From the shadows, I watched as he leaned in, his voice low but careless. "This whole thing's a game," he said, his tone dripping with arrogance. "You just have to know how to play it. The connections you make here, they'll do anything for you if you dangle the right carrot. Hell, they don't even care if it's illegal." The other man laughed nervously, but Damien continued, oblivious to the recording device I'd hidden in the room earlier. He boasted about cutting deals under the table, using his connections to dodge legal scrutiny, and leveraging secrets he'd learned at the Masquerade to control people. When he finally left, I retrieved the device, the weight of it solid in my hand. This was it, the first crack in his armor. The recording spread through the right channels like wildfire. I sent it anonymously to his business partners, investors, and key figures in the industry. I knew exactly who would react and how. The fallout was immediate. Within days, whispers turned into open accusations. Damien's carefully crafted image of success began to crumble as his partners withdrew their support. Deals fell apart, and his name became toxic in every circle he'd once dominated. The humiliation was palpable. At the next Masquerade, Damien's usual bravado was absent. He moved through the crowd like a ghost, his smile forced, his movements tense. The guests had heard the rumors, seen the fallout, and their glances were no longer admiring. But I wasn't done. I released the second blow, a carefully edited clip from the recording that tied Damien directly to the Masquerade. His name became synonymous with the society's more illicit activities, tainting his reputation further. Sophia tried to reach out during this time, her messages filled with pleas for understanding, for forgiveness. I ignored them. Her silence at Damien's side during his fall spoke volumes. She was watching the man she'd betrayed me for unravel, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Damien had spent years building his empire, cultivating an image of power and influence. Now it was in ruins, and he had no idea who had orchestrated his downfall. That was the most satisfying part. But this was just the beginning. Sophia's turn was coming, and she wouldn't escape unscathed. I thought Damien was the architect of my downfall. For weeks, I focused my rage and energy on him, convinced that he had drawn Sophia into his world and turned her against me. But as the dust began to settle, new pieces of the puzzle emerged, and the picture they formed was even darker than I'd imagined. It started with a conversation I overheard at the Masquerade. Two women, unaware of my presence, whispered about Sophia. Their words were laced with disdain. "She wasn't just his plaything," one of them said. "She helped him." Lucas had no idea. I stayed rooted in the shadows, my pulse pounding. They mentioned financial secrets, decisions I'd made at my company that Damien had somehow used against me. It didn't make sense until I started digging. Through old emails, financial statements, and scraps of information I'd overlooked, the truth came into focus. Damien hadn't manipulated Sophia into betraying me. She had been an active participant, feeding him information about my business, my plans, and even my vulnerabilities. The most damning evidence came in the form of a document she'd saved on her personal laptop, a shared bank account under her name and Damien's, filled with money siphoned from my accounts. It wasn't just betrayal. It was theft. Sophia's actions weren't born from loneliness or weakness. They were calculated. She and Damien had planned to use my downfall as their launching pad, to build a life together once I was out of the picture. But Damien's ruin had left her stranded, her grand plans in ashes. When I confronted her with the evidence, her face betrayed everything. There was no denial, no pleading this time. She knew she was caught, and her silence was the loudest confession she could have made. Sophia's fall had to be as public and complete as Damien's. She had operated in the shadows for too long, wearing a mask of innocence while she dismantled our life. It was time to pull that mask off. I started with her closest friends, those who still offered her tentative support despite the whispers. I didn't need to say much, just enough to plant doubt. A few carefully worded conversations about her involvement with Damien, her role in the Masquerade, and the stolen money did the rest. The stories spread quickly, amplified by those who already resented her. Within days, Sophia's social circle began to shrink. Invitations stopped coming. Her name became synonymous with scandal and deceit. But I wasn't satisfied with whispers. I released the financial documents anonymously to key figures in our community. The proof of her betrayal and theft was undeniable, and the fallout was swift. Her reputation was destroyed, her connections severed. Sophia tried to reach out to me, leaving frantic voicemails and emails filled with apologies and excuses. I didn't respond. She had made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. By the time I saw her again, she was a shadow of the woman she'd once been. Her once pristine appearance was disheveled, her confidence replaced with desperation. She tried to explain herself one last time, but I cut her off. "We're done, Sophia," I said, my voice cold. "You made sure of that." She left, her shoulders slumped, and I knew I'd never see her again. With Damien and Sophia both ruined, I should have felt victorious. I had destroyed the people who betrayed me, dismantling their lives as thoroughly as they had tried to destroy mine. But as I sat alone in the quiet of my house, surrounded by the remnants of what we'd once built, I didn't feel triumphant. The man I'd been, the one who believed in loyalty and trust, was gone. In his place was someone colder, someone who had embraced the same ruthlessness I despised in Damien. The revenge had been precise, methodical, and complete, but it hadn't brought me peace. It had only left me with questions. Was I any better than them? Had I sacrificed my own humanity to punish their betrayal? I stood in the empty living room, staring at the space where Sophia's laughter had once filled the air, where our life together had seemed so full of promise. The silence was deafening. Revenge had cost me everything: my marriage, my trust in others, and, in many ways, myself. The scars of their betrayal ran deep, but the ones I'd inflicted on my own soul felt deeper. I poured a drink and sat in the dark, letting the weight of it all settle over me. I didn't know who I was anymore, and I wasn't sure I wanted to.